Yeah.
Yeah, just such a
That's
good
good.
perspective gainer.
Yeah.
Could you also discuss with us the different attachment styles?
Yeah. So there's the disorganized attachment, there's anxious attachment, there's avoidant attachment, and there's secure attachment. I won't go too deep into all of them because it's, obviously we could spend an hour doing that. And there's so many great resources on attachment. It's crazy how popular this is now. It's like the trendiest thing ever to talk about attachment styles.
Yeah.
But essentially what I see in all of them, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized, is it's all coming from anxiety, and it's coming from lack of a secure, safe, loving foundation in early childhood. And so our nervous system wired in a way that we don't fully trust love. And so the anxious person is the one who sort of like leans away and then comes back in and is like, hey, I really need to work this out now. I really need to figure this out because you need to help me feel safe. And I need these things from you, and I need you to tell me how you feel all of the time, or I don't trust it. And then the avoidant person is the one who's like, I need space. I need to get away. I probably am not even going to communicate my feelings when I'm upset, or maybe even at all, because I'm so terrified of rejection that I can't bear to bring myself to you. And then, the disorganized is kind of a mix of both, where it's like a push-pull constantly and just not sure if I'm coming or going, which can be utterly confusing.
Yeah.
And we tend to demonize or vilify the avoidant attachment styles in our culture. We're like, oh, well, screw them. If they're avoidant, who needs them? Just let them go.
Yeah.
And well, I think if you're a person who is anxious in the pattern of avoidant anxious attachment, chasing an avoidant person is not going to work. It's not going to serve you. It doesn't mean you just stay in it, but also just watch your mind. You don't need to vilify them either, because they're also anxious. They're also coming from a wound. It's just expressing differently. So where I see us going in this is to recognize that all of these responses come from some hurt place inside. And while that doesn't mean that we need to try to fix and save each other, we can also come away from it knowing that we're not responsible for the other person's behavior. And so, like I mentioned in my relationship with Ben, right, we had the push-pull thing going on. Like, I would be like really anxious and we had to fix this, and he was like, I'm out. I need space. I got to go to the gym. I don't even want to talk to you for a day. And that is sort of a result of how we wire when we're kids. And they've done studies, and they find, some babies just are avoidant from the start, and it can be based on birth trauma. It can be based on just like little subtle things, because we're so sensitive when we're babies and when we're children, when we're wiring, that little events can actually impact us so much more than you would ever think, which is why the conversation of attachment styles has even come in, because we are wiring our nervous systems until we're about 7, our brains and our nervous systems. And so even these like little micro traumas that can happen where, our parent goes away for the day to work and we had a meltdown over it, that could be perceived as like a break in attachment. And then if there's not a repair done, then we might find ourselves becoming anxious in relationships in the future. And so the key word there is repairs. Like, do we take the time to repair the break in attachment, which can be done? It can be done either in childhood as a parent with your child, or it can be done later in life as an adult in relationship. You can move towards and become a secure attachment style. You're not anxious or avoidant, and then you're that forever. So when people identify as anxious attachment or avoidant, I always like to reference the reframe of becoming secure. Because I'm working towards becoming a secure attachment, rather than I'm anxious. I'm anxious attachment style. It's just how I am. You're just going to have to deal with it. And it almost becomes an identity. And that's not your identity. You can actually become secure.
Yeah, and we reference Stan Tatkin's work a lot with being a wave or anchor or island in a similar sense. It's like, we label ourselves. I feel like millennials too were really famous for doing
We're
this.
like, nobody likes an island.
Yeah, nobody likes an avoidant attachment.
Yeah.
But I also think it's so valuable that we have the ability to, do the research in order to sort through these labels and be like, okay, this is where I'm at now, and I know where I'm going. It plots a plan, in order to get to the goal.
Totally.
Yeah. I took a quiz that you posted today. I thought it was attachment styles, but I got mountain, which I was surprised because I with Stan Tatkin, I've always associated always thought of myself as a wave,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know what the other options were, but yeah, I got mountain on your quiz. So
yeah, so we sort of mirrored attachment styles, but we wanted to really move away from, again, this like pathologizing of it. And so we did the wind and the ocean and the mountain, because all of the elements are beautiful. They're just doing their thing.
Yeah,
and if
all of those sound great.
Yeah, and it just shows up differently, doesn't it? And so then we can say, okay, well, this is how I'm showing up, and here's how it's serving me, and here's how it's not. There's a beautiful gift inside of every quality that lives within us. And so if we remove the shame, then we can actually be with that. We can come more into balance.
Yeah. Thank you for that hope. We need that.
Why do we become attached to the idea of our partner being responsible for our happiness?
Because we're in relationship with ghost figures always, and we're projecting our parents onto our partners, and we were wired to want to have our needs met, and again, this comes back to the inner child. We all have an inner child, and we are all kind of parenting each other in this life as partners, and that's not always a bad thing. But when we bring our finished business into the present with our partners, it's really easy to slip into that projection and think that our partners are actually our mom or our dad, and it's not conscious, it's unconscious, and so we don't even know that that's happening. But the inner child, the child just wants to be loved. The child wants to be validated and seen and heard and accepted, and everything is about them, right? It comes back to this self-centeredness. And so this is why when we get into the power struggle in relationship, it's so hectic and it's so annoying, because you're not hearing each other, you're not meeting each other's needs, you're not listening at all, and you're just making demands. And this other person just won't do what you want. And you're both doing it because you're both in your child self, and the child self is entitled. It's like me, me, me. So to step out of that, we nurture our inner child, we reconnect to our own inner child, we reparent ourselves, and then we let our partners off the hook, because we remember, right, they're also trying to get their needs met. And they're not my source of happiness and validation. They're a partner for me, and they can be a source of validation and happiness, but they can't be the source.
Man, I hope I'm able to step out of this inner child situation that I always go back to and become like the woman I'm here to be during this lifetime. I feel like at least we have this podcast that reminds me and reinvigorates me and remotivates me every time we sit down with someone like you. So
totally.
Work medicine. Well, you already gave us some tips on how to self-soothe, but that is something that I'm trying to learn how to do myself, because I feel like it's maybe one of my hardest struggles is, like we were just talking about, reaching out for my partner to be there as my soothing aid, Do you have any maybe just foundational tips for how to go into that type of work?
Yeah, for self-soothing, which is, to me, it's the work, because if we can learn how to self-soothe, we can slow down, we can breathe, we can notice where we are in the room, we can listen to the sounds, we can feel our bodies, right? We can be like, all right, I'm here, I'm safe, I'm okay. And I don't need to react so strongly. I don't need to project. I don't need to defend. I can just soften and be. That's what self-soothing allows us to do. And so taking breaks throughout the day to feel what we're feeling. Oh, I wonder what sensations are in my body right now. Maybe I feel some tingling in my foot, or I feel some sensation in my arm, or I feel tension in my face, right? Maybe I want to relax my shoulders a little bit. I can feel my bum on my chair. These simple acts of noticing our body sensations and naming it allows us to soothe and calm our nervous systems. And then, of course, there's the breath, right? Am I breathing shallow or heavy? Is it tight? Like, am I holding on, and am I not taking a breath, and I'm talking really fast and I'm saying everything a mile a minute and I'm not present at all? So I can just take a breath, just let it out. Okay, I've arrived. I'm here. What am I feeling? What do I want to share? Do I want to maybe just listen? And so we're self-soothing every time we drop in. And of course, there are other ways to self-soothe, like, you can just count your breaths. You can go and do a meditation. You can listen to an inner child meditation. You can go for a walk. You can do somatic work, right? There's all of these things, but it really all comes down to slowing down, tuning in, breathing, and just being present with yourself, remembering where you really are, You're here now in the present moment. You're not in the past. You're not in the future. That's it.
That's, yes, need more of that.
Mhm.
Okay, we're going to move into a new topic, which is I'm so excited for. Here on the show, we like to call ourselves Pactivists, which stands for poop and period activists. So you are the guru when it comes to menstruation and birth and moon cycles and all that. So would you please describe the phases of a menstrual cycle and enlighten us on the power we embody in each of the 4 phases of the cycle?
Yeah, I can be called a guru before. It's nice. So first, just starting out, like there are a bunch of book lists on risingwoman.com that I've listed all of my favorite books from some of my most favorite teachers and really sort of the pioneering women who are now like in their 70s and 80s who really founded this work for me. And so I'm just so grateful for them, because without them, I wouldn't even have this wisdom. So the 4 phases I like to relate to, we could do archetypes, but I really like to do the seasons because I relate so much to the seasons just in my emotions. And so winter time is week 1, which is like when you're bleeding, you're on your moon or you're menstruating. And during that phase, there have been some sayings that a woman cannot tell a lie while she's on her moon. And now, of course, you can tell a lie, but what that really means is that you're the most honest, right? You're the most direct, almost like cutting, because you're just like, I don't have time for this shit. Here's the truth. And so they relate this to the crone phase, right? The elder crone woman, because what do we know about that is that it's really just, you know, she's come to the point in her life where she's not hiding anymore. She's really honest and direct and also deeply wise. So during the winter phase, it's inward, it's quiet. You don't want to be rushing around, taking care of everybody, feeding everyone, you know, cleaning and cooking and running a business. You just want to really be off your feet if you can. I sometimes spend 2 full days in bed on my moon. I bring my computer in bed, right? And there's a beautiful gift to just allowing yourself that time if you can, even if, you know, that's totally not possible for you. You're like, probably like, yeah, right. But if you can take any time to be really quiet and inward, then I find that winter or moontime cycle is really a beautiful time where we just really can go inward and get clear. Like if there's something that's not clear, we can really find clarifying moments in our cycle at that time. And then we move into the inner spring, which is like pre-ovulation. And that's kind of like after you have had your moon. And that's kind of like, if you think of spring, it's like we've had a long winter. We've been really inward. We haven't been seeing anyone. We've been just like hibernating. Now we're starting to come out. Ooh, it's a little bit warm outside. There's some flowers. Like, I think I want to go smell them. And I'm feeling a little bit more social. It's like mating time. And then
we're blossoming.
Yeah. So week 1 is like your energy levels, your hormones are starting to rise, and you can start to feel more outward and like having more energy to actually do things. And then week 2 is when you're like in ovulation. You might be ovulating in week 3, which is like you're in summer now and you're ovulating. Now you're like getting into it. You're like, oh yeah, I'm really out there and I'm feeling extroverted and maybe social, but also there's a bit of a waning starting to happen because you're about to go into moon time. And so I find like week 1, I'm pretty on it. Week 2, I'm getting really into life, and that's when I want to make plans and socialize. And then week 3, I'm about to ovulate, and then I ovulate, and that's where we might find that we are really magnetic. That's where we might find that we get more yeses from people. Like there's literally scientific studies that tell women go ask for a raise when you're ovulating. You might find that if you're not a really bright color person, you will be when you're ovulating. I used to go shopping when I was ovulating, and then these really bright dresses, and I'd come home, and then the next week, what the hell was I thinking? I must have bought that when I was ovulating. I stopped doing that because I'm not actually a bright color person, but if you are, it's a great time to go and get bold.
Yeah.
And then we move into fall, which is, again, you're really winding down. Your hormones are really starting to wane now, and the leaves are falling, and you're starting to feel cozy again, and you don't want to be out as much, right? The weather's colder. You're starting to get ready for winter. Now you're just preparing. And so I actually sometimes notice that this can be a lot like preparing for birth, where I'll go through this manic cleaning phase, and I'll be nesting and preparing and just getting ready. And I'll even have this crazy burst of creativity right before winter comes, right before my moon. And so if we allow ourselves to use our cycle as a way to operate in harmony with our lives, then we can schedule things for when we're going to be feeling really good. So like we can schedule things for spring and summer, and we can book more time off for ourselves. Like we might not want to be social during our winter phase, or we might want to do less during fall because it's starting to wane. So I've organized my schedule based on my cycle. So I don't take any clients, I don't take any calls, I don't do any interviews the 3 days before my cycle and for 3 days after, because I know that I'm not going to want to. I'm going to be like, oh, I'm so inward, I can't do it. So Heather and I, she created a mystic moon calendar years ago, and then we decided to rebuild it together, and we added a 65-page guide with it, and it's free for download on our website, and it walks you through all of your cycle. And then there's a whole herbal guide and nutrition guide, and you can learn how to live in harmony with your cycle. And
if a man read it, would it help him live in harmony with our cycle?
Yes, actually, I created a partner calendar in it.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. So, what I actually built was something for Ben, and it was here's my cycle, and I broke it up week by week. And then I had to really tune into, okay, what do I need week by week? What mood am I in? Obviously there's, ebbs and flows, but what am I feeling? What am I needing most? And how could he support me? Yeah. And so in it, week by week, I said, here's what I'm experiencing. Here's where my hormones are at. And here's what I need. So for example, in week 3 and 4, I wrote in there, we used to have a small apartment before we moved into a house. And it was like, if you've got guests over, you don't have any space. So I wrote in week 3 and 4, how you can help me is not scheduling plans with friends who are going to be in the home, keep our space really clear and free of anybody else's energy. Things you could do is like, ask me how I'm feeling. Don't make as many jokes because I'm more sensitive. Run me a bath, give me space, encourage my alone time. Week 2, great time to plan a date, great time to invite me out to things, great time to have people over for dinner. And so he had this little guide on our fridge that told him where things were at. And so it wasn't like he had to do those things. They weren't demands, but if he wanted to get in tune and he wanted to have a more harmonious relationship, then he had a reference.
Just saying, guys.
And this is all on the Rising Woman website?
Yeah, it's in the Mystic Moon Calendar.
Mystic Moon Calendar.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, and you can download it on our website.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I just want to say that for women who scoffed at the idea that a man might even think about, reading this type of calendar or posting it on your fridge and actually applying it to your life with him. My husband 2.5 years ago, when I asked him to do that, laughed at me and told me that no man would do that because you're just basically asking him to take on more responsibility. And 2 years, so that seed was planted, and then little by little, he's come up to the occasion and rose to the occasion, and now is very much open to it. And he actually is very inquisitive about it, and he's turned around. So there is hope. And of course, Sheleana's husband, Ben, is obviously, he has a podcast called The Modern Man. So he's very advanced in this. So there's already 2 guys as examples of what this work can help with bringing to light in a relationship. So I think it's very powerful stuff. They're all about it.
Yeah, actually, I think, so his podcast is called Evolving Man. Yeah. And if you go back into the archives somewhere, we did a podcast years ago on menstruation together because he was so curious about it. It's funny, all of the men in our community, they all talk about it together. And, I'll be like, oh, how's so-and-so doing? Or how's your wife? And, oh, she's on her moon today, so I'm just bringing her food or just getting out of the house, that kind of thing. So
cute.
It's possible.
Yeah. And sorry, Evolving Man. I said it wrong.
Yeah.
So moon cycle, the term, can you tell us where that originates? Because I feel like we just say it and we don't really think about why it's that way.
Well, in ancient times, and even in, Egypt, we used to use astrology and the stars as a way to track everything, basically time and, what was going to happen in the future. And we've obviously moved far away from that now. But, there is some ideology that says that when we were living in more tribal times, that our cycles would reflect the moon cycle. And so we would actually ovulate and then bleed with, full and new moon. But now that we are in such a modern world with all of this excess light, it makes it a little bit more challenging. And so, you know, typically they would find that we were impacted by the light, our cycles were impacted by the light of the moon. So if we slept, you know, with our bedroom window open and then there was the full moon there, it was impacting our cycle. And so, you know, there's some research that says that that's true and some research that says that it's not. But regardless of that, it's actually quite a beautiful way to feel in tune with the earth and with nature, because the moon cycles really do reflect different inward phases. And I find that, you know, when it's a full moon, I almost always know. And when it's a new moon, I almost always know, because I can see my behavior is different. I used to have a partner who I would have a fight with like every single full moon when I was in my 20s. And I was like, oh, we fight every full moon. This is weird.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's those kind of things.
I say that's when the werewolf comes out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally.
So do you think if we didn't have any of the endocrine disruptors and the fake lighting and all that stuff, that we would be all cycling at the same time as women?
I think that it would be more likely.
Okay.
And because, you know, we've already seen this, that in groups of women, we tend to sync up. Like our cycles tend to sync up. I mean, I've had this happen dozens of times with close friends. You know, we spend enough time together. We're all bleeding at the same time. And so it's not really, I mean, it's just, that's primal. That's what happens, right?
Yeah.
And who was it? I think it was the author of Sex at Dawn. And there's a lot of other stuff on primal behavior that talks about how, you know, we do sync up. And so, yeah, it would be totally likely if we're in close proximity that we would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So how has the patriarchy played a major role in creating shame and suppression around both menstruation and birth, for that matter?
Well, what I will say is that there has always been, essentially, except for, you know, in really, really, really ancient times when we worshipped the goddess, like way, way back, you know, it's always been that way. And it's related to fear. And there's this book called, what was it called? The Curse. I used to go deep into the history of menstruation, like just really weird books. And this one was all about the history of all of the different ways that different cultures throughout many lifetimes have made up really evil stories about women when they're menstruating. And so it's built into our society, it's built into our culture, and it's not new. It's been like that for so long. And when I've done really deep studies on, you know, women's shamanism and female spirituality, we find that sometimes it is related to power and control and fear of a woman's power, or fear of her moods, or fear of her changes, because, you know, we're chaotic and way more emotionally expressive, and certain parts of our cycle, we're just a completely different person.
And I like to say we are powerful. I mean, our energy is aggressive, or it's a lot. So if we're not harnessing it, or the people we're with aren't able to co-harness it in a positive way, then yeah, it can be misdirected in a really not so fun way.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think like really we're actually doing a much better job at becoming more positive and aware of menstruation and normalizing it. I used to make a practice of just telling people directly, you know, if I was scheduling an appointment with a man and I'd say, I can't meet this day or on this weekend, he would say, why? I'd say, because I'll be bleeding at that time.
Yeah.
And I really made a practice of being direct with him, even if it made him uncomfortable, because I really wanted to normalize that. And so I will tell anyone, I mean, not anyone probably, but I'm sure there's someone I wouldn't tell. But, you know, if somebody asks me directly, I will tell them, and I will look them in the eye, and I'll just stay present, because it's nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah.
But when it comes to birth, that's such a big one that I get so fired up about, because birth can be a really sacred rites of passage for us as people, but we've really removed ourselves from that, and we've moved into the medicalized birth society where we fear our bodies, we don't trust our bodies, and we've given our power away. And I think it's in the US, you know, we have like the highest mortality rate of any modern country, and it's actually not safe to give birth in a hospital there. African American women are dying at just horrific rates. They're not being protected, and there's a lot of injustice that happens in the realms of birth. And so I remember starting to study birth when I was 21 years old, and I would just go on these day-long birth binges where I would watch birth on YouTube. And I just watched hours and hours of natural birth, and I realized what's possible for the body. And I studied all of these teachers, and Ina May Gaskin, if you've ever heard of her, and just different authors who really championed essentially human rights for women in birthing. And I learned that birth moved into the hospital as sort of like a marketing strategy when people weren't going to hospitals because that's where death happened. And so people were too afraid. And so they wouldn't go when they were sick. Mm-hmm. And so as a way to sort of bring people into the hospitals, they brought birth there. And then actually birth intervention and death rates actually rose because, you know, doctors were doing autopsies and then going and putting their hands in a woman's vagina, and they didn't understand bacteria yet. And so, you know, the death rate was quite high. And then we had all of these just horrific historical interventions that we used, right? And so really there was a lot of trauma, a lot of stripping away of a woman's power, and also a man's ability to connect and bond, to see his woman's power when he's watching his woman give birth, and also his ability to bond and connect with his child because they were kept out of the hospital rooms. And so if we think about it, like that's what our parents and their parents and their parents went through. And so it kind of helps you understand how we have so much trauma and so much broken attachment, because
generational.
Yes. And how we're born, it's so impactful, right? And when I did a lot of my birth doula training, they talked about how a woman never forgets her birth. You know, you can ask a woman who's 95 who doesn't remember anything, and chances are if you ask her about her birth, she might remember. She'll probably tell you about it because it's a pretty impactful moment. And so for people who do choose to become mothers or do choose to give birth, I'm just so passionate about them really diving deep into the real science, the real facts, not the fear, and understanding that, you know, it is safe. Your body does know what to do.
Yeah. And you've talked about how now C-section is like, it's almost what you get, you know, when you go into the hospital.
I had 2. And so I didn't get to do any of my birth plan, and I wasn't as knowledgeable then about, you know, why they do C-sections and all of that stuff. So,
and how do you feel about that? Like, how was that for you?
I don't know if I'll have more children, so I do feel like I missed out on the experience. And both of my births were really a bit traumatic because I felt alone when it came to my partnership as well. And like I had to drive myself to the hospital while having contractions and carry my own luggage and all that stuff. So the entire experience, I feel like I missed out on, you know, what I had dreamt it would be. So the C-section just kind of topped it all off.
Yeah, that's a lot to go through. And I'm sorry that you didn't feel supported and that you didn't feel safe and protected in that, because everybody deserves to feel that when they're giving birth. I mean, it's our inherent right. And I think it's really important for people to know, like, regardless of how you gave birth, you did something amazing when you gave birth. And I can also so empathize with this feeling of kind of missing out. And I hear that when I talk to a lot of people who gave birth by C-section, and sometimes they feel like they didn't get to have the birth that they wanted. We don't validate in our culture because we say, oh, well, all that matters is a healthy baby. But what also matters is a healthy mother who felt respected and who felt cared for. We have to mother the mother, and that's something that we still haven't figured out. We don't do that anymore. Yeah.
My best friend is having a home birth in a couple of months, and she's letting me and my kids sit in on it. My kids are toddlers, but we're all going to sit on it. And I feel like that's going to be, I feel like that's going to kind of, we're so close that I feel like that'll give me the experience a bit. So
that's so beautiful to have the witnessing a birth. I've witnessed many births, and it's always so, it's like doing the craziest psychedelic drug. That's what it's like.
That's our next topic with you.
Yeah. Before we get into that, I just wanted to also note that, you know, if someone listening is maybe pregnant now and thinking about their options, like diving deeper into this, maybe you can invite them to some places that they can look deeper for research, but also that idea of a healthy baby. I don't know, specifically when I think about a healthy baby, and because of my own like digestion issues, I think about the microbiome and how going through your mother's vagina is so important because you pick up all that bacteria on the way out.
Mm-hmm.
That helps you have a healthy immune system, helps you have a healthy intestinal tract, all of those good things that we need in order to be healthy individuals. So there's just like, that's just like obviously the tiny tip of the iceberg of what is out there as far as why this could be beneficial for you to try to have a natural birth if that's possible for you. But
and just to touch on that too, now that C-sections have risen so high, they do have swabs, so they tend to swab the vagina and then put it in the baby's mouth after birth. So there is still a way to have that, but there is so many more layers to it that really it relates to the emotional connection and the attachment. And so I think what's happening now is that doctors and OBs and hospitals are really starting to see that. And even with the process of having a surgical birth, they're learning how to create more attachment within that so that we can still have these life-saving operations when we need them, because they are life-saving. And also, how can we reduce the rate of interventions that didn't need to happen because we were impatient? So there's a woman named Jessica Austin that lives in my community, and she has been a mentor of mine, and she's a woman I really respect. She runs something called Birth Takes a Village, and she recently came on Ben's podcast because I was like begging him to bring her on. I was like, you have to interview her. She is so science-based. She's essentially she's like a walking encyclopedia. That's what I'll say. She's a walking encyclopedia when it comes to birth, and she really knows the stats, and she knows the actual numbers, and she knows the facts about what is safe and what's not safe. And she can bust a lot of myths, and we do a lot of that on that podcast because I really felt passionate about giving people the science, because it's one thing for me to just go off about how spiritual the experience is and say how sacred it is, but you're talking about your life here. So they're like, I don't want to listen to this lady. So I say, go listen to her because she's got the science.
Yeah. We started to bring up plant medicine, and I know we're running out of time with you, but I just was curious what your experience with plant medicine is and how you feel about people using it for healing.
I have used plant medicine a lot in my journey. It's been a really life-saving tool for me personally.
Yeah, same for me.
Yeah, it sounds like we have some similar threads. I'm sure if you and I got into it, we would probably really be able to relate. I used plant medicine a lot to get to know myself and to meet myself in those dark and hard to love places. And I've pretty much worked with it all. Like, you name it, I've worked with it, except for iboga, because that sounds crazy. And iboga is really used as a way to treat severe addiction. I don't need to do it.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
It's like an African bush, I believe, or a bark. And it is a plant medicine that has actually been shown to remove the withdrawals of heroin. So if a heroin addict is going through withdrawal and they use iboga, of course, under supervision and carefully guided, then it can remove that painful withdrawal. So it helps them get clean, which is, as we know, with heroin, withdrawing from, it is like the most painful thing, and it's what makes it so impossible.
Wow.
So I worked with all sorts of things, and I did, the frog medicine, and I did lots of pape, which is just like a snuff, and I did lots of ayahuasca. Ben and I have worked with ayahuasca quite a lot, mushrooms, etc. And I've had just incredible healing from it, but I also know that it is really, really hard as somebody who never had secure attachment, who does have a lot of trauma, who does have a fried nervous system. What I learned is that actually I was pushing it a little too hard sometimes, and that what I needed most was gentleness, and what I needed most was just to feel safe. And some of these tools really are too much for some people. And so when people say, oh, do you recommend it? I say, I don't recommend it to anyone. I recommend that you follow your own call. And with plant medicines, I think it's important that we remember that they're tools. We don't have to do all of it. And we want to make really sure that we're prepared, that we have a really, really skilled and trained facilitator and space holder, and that we have the support for afterwards, because it can open up some really deep stuff. And if we're not ready, integration, if we're not ready for it, it can be bad. And so we have this weird thing going on right now where we have lots of people who are just jumping in and calling themselves shamans and healers without really training. So I would really caution against that and really find a good guide and facilitator if you feel drawn to working with plants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. We have many men who listen to this show, and you've said some beautiful things around making sure we support men as well as women. And that includes the men who've done some terrible things like being violent or have harmed women. They need support too. So in order to change that, we need to support anyone who's gone through that. So how can we support our men as a culture that is trying to take on this critical task of transitioning from toxic to healthy masculinity?
It's interesting because every time I hear the term toxic masculinity, when I really feel it in my body, I feel that there's something about it that doesn't quite resonate. And I think that's because I don't believe that masculinity can be toxic, just as I don't believe femininity can be toxic. I think what can be toxic is how we react to our circumstances and how we treat other people. And
so it's the story behind it.
It's the story behind it. And it's like, there's a book called The Boy Crisis. So for anyone who wants to kind of understand boys and men more, especially if you're really caught in this idea that men are the problem and that, they are toxic, I really suggest that book, even though I haven't read all of it, but Ben read it in bed next to me. Always was giving me quotes about it. And it really, I learned a lot actually. And it really touched my heart because I learned a lot about how boys are more neglected emotionally. They're treated differently. They're not welcome to feel their emotions from an early age. They're picked up less when they're crying.
Wow.
Like they're expected to be stronger than they really should be expected to be when they're so vulnerable. And so there is something to be said about really looking at the roots of our culture and our conditioning rather than blaming it on an energy or on a gender. And of course, masculinity is in all of us. You said you're a pretty masculine woman sometimes. So I think that's, we run businesses. Of course, we have a strong masculine edge. And I think that's a good thing to have.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Not in relationship.
Yeah. Well, it's about ebbing and flowing with it rather than staying in one stagnant energy. It's letting it flow. But I think what's true is that men need other men to support them, and they need other men to hold them accountable, and they need other men to call them out. And so what we're seeing now in my community, my husband, he's an executive of what they call the Samurai Brotherhood. And there's like 300 men in groups around the world now, actually, who meet every week. And they hold each other accountable. They talk about their feelings. They cry. They scream. They yell. They unleash their minds and their shadows. And they hold each other accountable. And they challenge each other. And there's a book called Iron John by Robert Bly. It's kind of like a mythopoetic men's work. And it's sort of about the stages that a man goes through to separate his identity from that of his mother's. And it's this really empowering journey that he goes on. And what I notice is that men do not have that very often in our society. Like, I think it's a stat that most men over the age of 30 or 40 can't name one person as like a close friend.
Yeah.
They commit suicide at higher rates. They're just struggling. Men are struggling, and the boys struggle too. And so I want to shift the conversation around that to more of just like, how can we all lean in together to this? Because, all of this stuff that's happening is learned behavior. It's learned and it's passed down, and it's ingrained in us just as much as it is ingrained in them. And so if we can start to see each other again as teammates rather than opponents, imagine what's possible if we can start to heal together. And then I think it goes down to, how are we raising our young people too? Can we nurture them to feel safe to express their emotions so that they don't go out into the world and harm others?
Absolutely. And that leads me to want to ask, how can men approach women in a more authentic and balanced, integrated way? Which I know you've spoken on something. I think it was actually on Ben's show. You guys talked about something that David Data talks about, a macho jerk and the apologetic wimp. Yeah. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, Ben loves that reference.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, working with other men, so joining a men's group, I really suggest it. And not just because my husband runs one, but because even before he was an executive and like a part of that movement, I saw the benefits of him having other men to support him and hold him. And so that I didn't have to be that for him, because I think when we get into a relationship and we form this, what we call cult of two, like, I don't have any friends anymore, and like, let's not have any friends. Let's just rely on each other and expect everything from each other. And then it gets actually kind of icky. the relationship gets icky, and you become his mom and he becomes your dad or something else, and it just doesn't work out because the polarity gets killed and we don't have any space. And so I feel like men having each other's backs and really holding each other to a higher standard, like good models of what it means to be a conscious man, is so, so important. And that's what I see him doing and cultivating in this community. And I'm grateful for that. And also being willing to take feedback and be influenced by your partner. Like John Gottman talks a lot about how the science shows that if a man is willing to take feedback and be influenced by his partner, he has a much higher chance of having a successful marriage. And it's not because she's trying to control, it's because chances are her guidance and her influence can be helpful for him in his life. And so, you know, in my marriage, Ben and I, we have come up against this feeling of him being controlled or me trying to control him, but we really practice, and he's really softened to let me tell him what I see and let me influence him. And I think that's important as well. And then just remembering that, you know, vulnerability is a day-to-day practice. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to bear it all at once, you know, do what feels good.
Yeah. And that having a men's group, I mean, I feel like that is a kind of a newer movement. I guess there was men's groups or men's clubs, you know, at some point where they're hunting and they're doing some sort of manly things together. And I think if you think of it now, guys listening, there are options like, I don't know, you join a jujitsu class together, and I think men are doing that in ways where they try to find that camaraderie because they innately know they need that brotherhood somewhere. And so maybe it's when they go, like my husband goes out and surfs and his buddies will be out there, but they don't call and like set it up where they're going to go surf together. They just see each other out there and like, you know, hey bro. And then they might have an exchange, but deeper bonds can build, of course, out of those things. And especially I bring up jujitsu because it's such a intimate sport. You know, you're literally like rubbing bodies on each other. And so you become energetically, you're having such a intimate exchange. I think it's a really easy way to build a sort of brotherhood or to become bonded. But so that idea of trying to get a woman's approval when you're a man trying to navigate this place of Me Too movement and feminists and all the things that men are probably trying to navigate right now, and how to like pick up on a woman, for instance, that's got to be kind of a complex way to go about that. And that's why everyone's probably using dating apps instead of anything in person. So maybe can you speak to like, just give a tip on how a guy might approach a girl that would be in this day and age accepted way better than probably any other tactic that they've tried so far? So I know you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a subjective question, of course, because everybody's so different. Like what I like and what you like might be totally different. But the first thing that just comes to my mind is just be in your body. Just be in your body. Feel yourself, right? Be rooted, because we are energetic beings and we can sense when someone's not in their body. And also be authentic and true to your intentions, because a woman can pick that up.
Yes, I do agree. I think that's what that macho jerk and apologetic wimp thing is like. You're either going to be on one end of the spectrum or the other if you're trying too hard to be something you're not. So
yeah, and that's what Ben and I are really working on creating with Evolving Man and with the content we do together, is to just really help guys make sense of what does it mean to be a conscious man, and is it okay to own my feelings and also like be a sexual beast? And yes, it is. And there's a lot of resources coming for guys.
Yeah. And that's what women actually want, you know, at the end. Sometimes we're not able to voice it very well.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to head into our staple questions so that we can wrap this up. It's just a few short questions we like to ask everyone who comes on the show. So if you could hug your younger self right now, what would you say?
Everything's going to be okay.
And how old is she?
3.
Oh, baby girl.
Yeah.
That's how old my daughter is.
Oh, so sweet.
If you could have the whole world read one book, which would it be?
You've already given us 100, so.
Yeah,
I know. It's like my least favorite question because I'm like,
I know.
I read so many books, you guys. Oh God. Okay. I'm going to give you 2 because I can't conform to this question. So Getting Love You Want, obviously, is wonderful by Harville Hendricks. And then also I really love Conscious Loving. And then they have The Conscious Heart by Gay and Katie Hendricks.
I don't know that one.
It's their second. It's like their second conscious loving book, basically. And I just finished it, I don't know, 6 months ago. It's amazing. I absolutely love it.
The Conscious Heart.
Yeah. Gay and Katie Hendricks.
Definitely. I'm with all of it. If you could whisper one phrase to everyone on the planet, what would it be?
You're connected to everything.
That's good. I love that. Okay, so before we let you go, where can people find you online?
risingwoman.com. It's woman.com. And then on Instagram, we are at Rising Woman. We're also on Facebook as at Rising Woman Official, because I couldn't get the actual URL. And yeah, those are the three main places. But Instagram is really where we're bumping. We're bumping over there. But if you want the free gifts.
Yeah, we love your Instagram. We are always sending back and forth your posts.
Thanks.
Big fans.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for coming on and being such a light with your work. I cannot praise you enough, because this is really everything you're doing. You have your hands in so much, and you seem to be really managing it all gracefully, which is incredible in itself, because there's so many different things that you are attacking, and just really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was really good. I learned a lot about the moon cycle that I didn't know about, which is the topic that I thought I would learn the least about.
Really?
Yeah, I learned a lot, and I am super excited to use her calendar. And
I've already
I'm
been
so happy that the man has one. Yeah, that is a magic trick
in itself.
Keeps giving.
Yeah, exactly. Print out that
every month, all month.
Yeah, she talked about actually when she talked about that calendar, when I've heard her talk about it before anyway, she said while she was menstruating one time, she was, taking her 3 days off, like she said she does. And so she was like, what should I do? I should just doodle a calendar for Ben. So she basically put that one together that she explained. And so now, I'm on day 1 of my period right now, ain't afraid to say it. And I was like, I should be putting together a calendar right now for Chris, but then I didn't. I got on here and did this podcast, so I should be doodling moon calendars. I'll get there. I have it in my calendar right now. Take 3 days off when my period comes, but it hasn't worked out yet. Jade.
Yeah, I definitely have some homework with that.
Yeah, really. I'm so glad.
What about your own personal magic trick tonight?
My magic trick today.
What time is it?
Where are we? We've been on this podcast for 2.5 hours. Is to basically self-soothe, but I came up with this technique kind of on my own, and I have been trying it for myself, and I really like it. So I thought I'd share it with y'all, because self-soothing has been, like I mentioned earlier, something I'm really trying to get better at, so that I don't have to rely on other people for my own happiness or ability to regulate my emotions. So the technique is to text yourself all the things that you need to hear that week. Maybe you needed to hear them from your romantic partner, or from your boss, or from a friend, or even from yourself, but that didn't happen when you wanted it to. So now you have the chance to remedy that by doing it yourself. So for example, you could text yourself, you're so smart and have really great ideas. You deserve to relax and enjoy yourself. You're a hard worker, and I appreciate your diligence and professionalism. Thank you for holding a safe space for me to express myself, and for being such a wonderful listener. Thank you for being so patient. You're creative, and your ingenuity is not overlooked. You're a beautiful human being. Any of these things work, right? You get the idea. And you could obviously make it even a little more specific to the person that you wanted to have sending it to you. Like you're a great girlfriend, for instance, or you're an amazing sister, and I'm so proud that you're a part of my family, whatever it might be, or whoever it might be coming from. And just note that it might be a good idea to do it as a voicemail or a voice note if sound resonates better for you, which is something that works really well for me. So I like to hear someone say it, maybe your love language is words of affirmation.
I didn't think about that. Yeah, that is my love language, and I've been mad at words lately, so
it might feel weird to tell yourself these things, especially because you're
just don't. It's like that Friends episode where Rachel checks Ross's voicemail and it's to himself.
Yeah, it's all the note to self. Yeah, but okay, so it might feel a little weird because you were hoping it came from another person, but the reality is being upset that you didn't get that from another person doesn't get you anywhere. And instead, if you tell yourself these things, it will neurologically have an effect on you for the better. Even simply because you're taking the time out to make this effort of self-love for yourself, but also because the things you're saying are true, whether someone else recognizes them or not. So writing them down and reading them to yourself is a way to make them part of your reality, and I highly recommend it. I like it so far.
Yeah. I actually did a self-soothing for my magic trick also, but I pulled it from Rising Woman, and she kind of already said some of it since we asked her how we can self-soothe. Yeah. But I wanted to go ahead and read her post on it because I saved it to my phone. This was like a month ago. I saved it to my phone because I wanted to implement it. So
Perfect.
She says, first of all, remember that it's okay to feel big emotions, and sometimes your nervous systems need a reminder that you're safe. You don't have to do it all alone. It's okay to ask for help, call a friend, or even better, find the support of a coach, therapist, or healer who can help you learn to soothe your nervous system. But there will inevitably be times when there's no one available to support you. And in those moments, and on a day-to-day basis, learning to self-soothe is a very powerful skill. So when you're feeling that big emotion, take a few deep breaths and notice where you are. Tell yourself, I am safe. It's okay to feel what I'm feeling. I think that's important. It's okay to feel what I'm feeling. Notice the sensations in your body and breathe into the tension. Notice any desire to leave your body. That's a big one for me. And retreat into your mind and visualize the roots of a tree, grounding you to where you are. That's probably my favorite one. Pick up a book and read for at least 15 minutes or until you're feeling better. My favorite method of self-soothing, sometimes I just pick up a book and I make myself read 50 pages and I don't let myself put the book down. Now that I'm a mom, this isn't my favorite practice, but I would just read 50 pages. And by the time I put the book down, I would feel completely different. So that one's a really good one. This one, she said, go for a walk in nature and notice the beauty around you. Remember deep breaths. Write a letter to your inner child and talk to them like a loving, nurturing, and protective parent. I haven't done that one, but I really want to do it. I've done it in a meditation. But listen to the Healing Your Inner Child meditation, which is free on the Rising Woman website. You can also find that in her bio on her Instagram. Make yourself a cup of tea or fruit-infused water and sip it slowly, which is just, you're practicing simply being with what you're feeling by just doing that slowly.
Mindfulness.
Yeah.
I love those. Yep. I'm getting better, actually.
I think it's powerful because all those things teach you to be in your body.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Grounding for sure.
You're not distracting yourself. Yeah. All right, Magic Mobbers. Thank you so much for tuning in and taking this journey with us. If this episode held some magic for you, please share it with your friends and family. This one means so much to us. And don't forget to join us on our Instagram page at The Magic Hour and let us know what your favorite episodes have been so far. We appreciate all of your feedback and want to know what's lighting you up.
Go listen to some of our past episodes in our podcast library now. We'll meet you there. Until then,
be a light.
Be a light.